Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. It's been a fair few weeks since I last recorded a video for this channel. That's just due to general busyness of life and the fact that there's been a lot going on for me personally. But I wanted to come back onto the YouTube channel today to discuss the goings on at the BBC over the last, 3-4 days, I suppose you could say, due to the tweet that Gary Lineker sent out a fair few days back, where he likened the Conservative policy regarding the arrival of boats on our shores to 1930s Germany. I think it's fair to say, first and foremost, that the entire backlash is something which has captivated the country. It has created headlines, not just in a sporting perspective, but also across the entire media landscape. But for me, the main reason for recording this video today is that I just can't for the life of me believe that the BBC did not have the foresight to appreciate that them speaking to Gary Lineker and getting him to sort of pedal back, or attempt to get him to pedal back on his tweet in the first place, wasn't going to lead to a situation in which they currently find themselves. If you've been living under a rock for the last 3 or 4 days and are unaware of the timeline of events, after conversations with Gary Lineker in which they discussed his tweet and his social media output generally, they tried, I believe, to get Gary to agree to a universal statement between himself and the BBC in which he expressed some form of regret for the way that his tweet had been perceived by certain sections of the media. He, fully believing in what he had said via his Twitter account, refused to do that, and as a consequence they decided to announce that they had agreed with Gary that he would take a step back from presenting Match of the Day. Quite predictably, I would suggest, very shortly afterwards, Ian Wright and then Alan Shearer both came out publicly to say that they wouldn't be appearing on Match of the Day in solidarity with Gary, and from there a whole host of dominoes fell in regards to Alex Scott, Jermaine Genius, Dan Walker, I believe, also weighed in, despite the fact that he is, of course, no longer part of the BBC Sport team. And then all of the commentators who also work for Match of the Day decided that they would, in solidarity with Gary, refuse to lend their voices towards the coverage that was going to be shown on Saturday evening. That led to a quite ridiculous situation in which the BBC decided to air 20 minutes of highlights from Saturday's games with no audio commentary whatsoever, no punditry, no presenting, no theme tune even. There was no reference made at the beginning of the 20 minutes to Match of the Day. And I just cannot believe that we have found ourselves in a situation where the BBC didn't see this as an obvious knock-on effect from their conversations and their decision relating to Gary Lineker and making him step away from his presenting role. I want to say that as much as, it's a political football, shall we say, the comments that were made by Gary, and whether or not you view them as correct, it's never going to be something that is given complete consensus in the minds of everyone who has an opinion on these things. But what I would like to believe via this YouTube video, and just generally, is that people can agree that in a democracy, in a free country, everyone has the right to express the views that they feel best represent them. And that's all that Gary Lineker was doing with that tweet. There was actually no reference directly made to the party. I won't mention it on this particular video for fear of YouTube hearing that word and then deciding they are going to do something with my video. But we all know the political party aligned with 1930s Germany that people have made that reference to. At no point did he actually use that particular word, but the rhetoric around it is something that he personally believed had, synergy with what was going on with that particular policy. And if you actually look into the BBC guidelines when it comes to their employees, it is very much an ambiguity in relation to what specific individuals can say via their own social media output. If he was a newsreader, then it becomes a far more tricky area because, of course, there is a real need for impartiality there. But having read a thread over the weekend on Twitter from somebody who did used to work within the BBC organisation, shall we say. He spoke about the fact that sports presenters or science presenters have within their own right the ability, whilst being employed by the BBC, to speak openly and freely via their own social media channels about what they view as the correct thing to do from a political perspective. If Gary Lineker had gone on to Match of the Day and made these same points completely aside from the football that he was supposed to be covering on that Saturday evening, then I think it's a far more thorny issue. But I do think, from my perspective, and I dare say, many thousands of people across the country, that he is within his rights to express those views via his own social media channels. We have seen a situation in recent times where David Attenborough, the institution when it comes to nature programmes associated with the BBC, has been producing a programme on the wildlife of the British Isles, and there are 5 episodes that are scheduled to be aired via the BBC primetime slots that go through all of the different natural beauties that exist within the British Isles. I believe there is a 6th episode which looks at the damage that has been done to those particular wildlife spots across the last few years, and the decision has been made within the BBC hierarchy to only show that particular episode on iPlayer rather than on the same primetime slot, and they have come under criticism from different publications. The initial article that I saw referenced this came from The Guardian, which of course does have left-wing political leanings, but they spoke about the fact that it wasn't being shown in prime time and was instead only going to be shown on iPlayer. The response, I believe, from the BBC to the criticism over that is that their decision was always to put it on iPlayer rather than prime time, and it's just an editorial policy. But at the same time, the BBC is supposed to be an impartial organisation by its very nature, and what I can't get my head around is the BBC deciding that, that might actually ruffle some feathers, so we better not put it on primetime television. Surely the entire point of the BBC as an organisation is that it occasionally gets under the skin of the left-wing side of the political spectrum and occasionally gets under the skin of the right-hand side. That shows true impartiality, and if you begin to kowtow to certain aspects of one side or the other, surely you are only aligning yourself with that side rather than remaining impartial and showing things that reflect both sides of society at the same point. There are, of course, numerous individuals throughout the BBC who have tweeted in recent years some pretty un-PC and unsavoury things. Alan Sugar is the name which immediately comes to mind for me. He, of course, is a focal point to the BBC flagship show The Apprentice. He has been for a number of years, and if you look at his social media output, it does leave a lot to be desired in terms of my own particular point of view. But I think it is imperative to highlight at this particular juncture that whilst I may not agree or like a lot of things that Alan Sugar has to say on social media, it is his right within a free country to express those views, and it is important once again to highlight that Alan Sugar is not employed by the BBC as a political correspondent or a news-based individual. He is someone that is part of an entertainment package. You look at Gary Lineker, of course he fronts BBC's sport coverage. It is a separate arm to the political or news arms of the BBC, and with that the ambiguity in his contract becomes a key point here, because you can't enforce the rules on someone like Gary Lineker whilst not doing the same to Alan Sugar. If you look at Alan Sugar's politics, you look at the whole situation with Jeremy Corbyn, you look at the whole situation with the unions, or indeed a number of comments that have been made via his Twitter account about certain aspects of society, it does throw up all sorts of questions if you are going to compare and contrast it with Gary Lineker specifically. But at no point has Alan Sugar come under any significant pressure from the head honchos at the BBC to step back from his role, and that is why I feel it's important to bring it up in relation to this situation with Gary Lineker. Of course, Gary Lineker earns a lot of money. He is the head of that BBC sport arm, if you will, and the scrutiny that comes to him is directly because of that. But if you are going to get into a tit-for-tat battle over individuals and whether certain people should be suspended and others not, then the money really shouldn't come into it. It should be the content of what they are saying, and the reasons that have supposedly been taken behind the scenes come down to that alone, rather than the financial issues that might, circulate around Gary Lineker's earnings per year from the BBC. And if you look at the BBC Sports situation as it is right now, they have a major problem on their hands. Football Focus didn't go ahead at the weekend. There are numerous people within the organisation that have shown solidarity with Gary, the commentators amongst them. If this continues for another 2, 3, 4 weeks, it really will do possibly, irrevocable damage to the BBC Sport brand and Match of the Day, which of course is an absolute institution in this country when it comes to football. They have a real problem coming up immediately with the FA Cup fixtures that are scheduled to be shown. It's going to be very difficult for them to do that, because anyone who does break ranks with the likes of Gary Lineker, Ian Wright, Alan Shearer, and goes on to present that, will potentially be throwing themselves open to the lions on social media, and quite rightly so in my position. So unless they can reach an agreement with Gary that sees him return to their screens, I'm just not sure how this particular situation plays out. I have seen numerous people on the right hand side of the political spectrum over the last 48 to 72 hours banging the drum to suggest that the 500,000 extra viewers who tuned into the 20-minute edition of Match of the Day on Saturday evening shows that they don't need pundits, they don't need commentators, they don't need a presenter. But I think it's important to highlight here, as I said directly to Nadine Dorries on Twitter yesterday, there are plenty of people who slow down on motorways to have a quick look at a car crash. It's a pure case of interest, really. It's curiosity rather than solidarity, and I think that is something that is being lost in translation by a number of people that are keen to sort of shout from the rooftops about the increase in viewing numbers. I would suggest that it's probably something they are well aware of, but they will use anything as a straw to grasp at the moment. I would imagine, if this continues for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, then those viewing figures will steadily decline. You can look towards Sky Sports YouTube coverage and the highlight packages of all the games from over the weekend to see they have had a significant spike in viewing numbers, and that is because they don't need to go to Match of the Day on a Saturday evening / Sunday morning to get that fixed. There is no such reason for it, because the analysis and the punditry is not there, and this is a difficult one for me. I have been vocal in my criticism of Match of the Day over the years for the fact that they do prioritise certain clubs over others. You always feel as though your team don't get enough coverage, etc, etc. But I also would like to say that the institution is Match of the Day is something which is part of the fabric of this country, and the fact that it is being dragged through the mud because of a situation in which Gary Lineker is being forced to step back for an opinion that he has as an individual, it does just lead me to wonder where this country is going generally. I wanted to make this point before signing off for the video as well. There was a very, very good clip that was circulated from LBC over the weekend with Lewis Goodall, in which he took one particular texter into task because she spoke about Gary Lineker and said, why doesn't he just stick to football? And Lewis Goodall quite correctly highlighted that individuals who operate within the footballing sphere have as much right as anyone else to make comments or positions about certain issues. You can look towards the England squad, as he mentioned, who all took the knee throughout the Euros. You can point towards Marcus Rashford and his campaign for free school meals to be extended, or even this situation with Gary Lineker right here and right now. And he quite rightly also mentioned the fact that Gary Lineker's wealth, in comparison to the vast majority of people in this country, does not separate him from so many people. You can't just assume that because someone works in a highly paid role and was a footballer, that they don't have an opinion on society as we are right now. And, I often get it myself, albeit to a far more minor aspect, in terms of the fact that I run a football Twitter account. As soon as I veer away from that or express a view that might not be to do with football directly, there will be people telling me in the comments, the replies, the quote tweets, to stick to football. But what is the point of existing as a human being if all you ever do is comment on what you do for a living? Imagine a teacher could only ever speak about education. Imagine a plumber wasn't able to go down to the pub and talk about football, talk about politics, talk about anything because he spent the entire day with his hands down a toilet. It is completely backwards, and it just shows to me, as Lewis Goodall once again rightly pointed out, that there is a classism that goes with this. There are people within this society who view football as a lesser than sport, and the people that play it, the people that watch it, and the people that comment on it as not worthy of having political opinions or indeed opinions on anything other than the game itself. And that is something which really does get under my skin. It's why I wanted to come onto this YouTube video today and discuss it. It's not as though I've said anything earth-shattering, and I am aware of that, but it's something that I feel deeply passionate about, because we are in a situation in this country right now where someone like Gary Lineker, let's not beat around the bush here. If he were to have pedalled back on that, expressed regret and moved on whilst continuing to work for the BBC, continuing to earn the amount of money that he continually gets stick for because he is a well-paid member of the BBC sport arm, surely that means he has less moral fibre than anyone previously gave him credit for anyway. The fact that he is prepared to stand up for it, the fact that he is prepared to say something that isn't necessarily going to win him any favours or friends in higher up positions within the BBC hierarchy or indeed in the government that we currently have, surely that makes him a man of greater moral standing than someone that will just take a paycheck for the sake of it. And I think it's important that we, as football fans and as individuals, stand by him, stand by Ian Wright, stand by Alan Shearer, and indeed everyone else that has chosen to take a stand over this particular issue, because it could be one of those situations that runs 3 or 4 weeks. People start to lose momentum with it, they start to lose that sense of injustice that is burning amongst them, and they just want to go back to Match of the Day being on our screens, and they would rather that Gary Lineker just, took his medicine and moved on. But I don't think that is something that we should ever allow to happen. This has to be a situation in which actual change is made. And, I've said it numerous times before on social media, football in this country has the ability to move the needle. We saw it with the European Super League and the backlash from supporters. We saw how quickly that entire plan came crashing down around everyone's ears, and if it wasn't for the volume and noise that was created by all those football fans, not just from the clubs that were going to go off, but also from across the game in general, then we probably would have seen it push through. And this isn't the same thing, but the fact that so many people have come out in solidarity with Gary, with Alan Shearer, with Ian Wright, it's heartwarming to see. And from my perspective, and I appreciate, this isn't necessarily a video that's going to get universal approval in and of itself, but I would like to just highlight again that for me the key factor here is freedom of speech. It's the right to express your view, and it's the right, whatever you do for a living, to feel as though your opinion matters. And it doesn't matter if you're Marcus Rashford, Ian Wright, Alan Shearer, Gary Lineker, or me on this YouTube video today. Everyone has the right to express those views, including you listening. So hopefully, you've enjoyed this little mini rant. It's not the normal style of it, but as I said when I first started the YouTube videos, my initial intention with all of these was to make the free podcast that I previously recorded for Patreon into video format. This is certainly something that I would normally have discussed on the podcast and made it free to air, but this feels like a more personal and easily accessible way for me to do that. So hopefully you have enjoyed it. If you have, then do click subscribe, do like the video, do share it on social media, because all of that helps me to grow this channel. And other than that, I will sign off there and look forward to speaking to you again in a few days. My plan is to do videos. I was going to do one on Southend. I'm not 100% sure that is going to actually go ahead now, because I just want to make sure that I can get the tone of it completely right. And as of right now, I am struggling to quite put my finger on how to phrase that video, but I also have plans to do videos on Middlesbrough and their resurgence under Michael Carrick, as well as Sheffield Wednesday, who are absolutely flying under Darren Moore at the top of League One. So after a pretty prolonged break in terms of these videos, I am back now, and you should see videos at least once a week, if not more, for the foreseeable future. So I will sign off there. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye for now.